Did he make news? Did we learn anything new?
Look, this was a compilation of some of Trump's greatest hits, I think, as you were suggesting. He sort of went into rally mode at times. But as I think you're saying, like, this was the first time that we really had it all packaged into one very succinct sort of hour-long event where we could put some of these ideas side by side. And I think what we learned was that Trump's proposal to just about the solution to just about any economic problem is tariffs. Whether you're talking about the trade deficit or the budget deficit or unemployment or inflation, Trump thinks that that tariffs would be a solution to all of these. Now, the tension in this interview was that that's not a very mainstream economic view. But Trump continued to push back and make his case. It felt a lot like 2016, which was a campaign very much based on this idea that the rest of the world is eating our lunch when it comes to trade, and we need to fight back. And this is, I think, it's 2016 exponentially larger.
Well, and 3 weeks out from an election, Wendy, it is a question of whether what economists believe really matters, or more so just what voters actually will believe, which raises the question of what audience Donald Trump was primarily speaking to today.
Absolutely. I'm not sure how much of Trump's base voters were tuned in, but the room seemed to be filled with business people who, at least partly filled with business people who largely agreed with him. And our poll, other polls consistently show the economy as the top issue, and that voters trust Donald Trump more on the economy than they do on other issues, especially those that are more people-oriented, that are more about what Kamala Harris calls the caring economy. But on economic issues like bringing manufacturing back to the United States, and people will believe Trump that tariffs work, despite the fact that most economists don't.
Well, it's interesting because Gregory mentions this felt a little bit like 2016, but those were relatively new ideas, at least for the current electorate when Donald Trump was talking about it then. We have 4 years to look back on. And we see that Joe Biden kept those tariffs in place.
He did.
Is that not a message in itself?
It is a bit of a message in itself. Trump wants to turbo those tariffs, of course, and make them much broader, much longer. It's also the only revenue enhancer he ever mentions. The other way is that the Democrats get around this is by raising taxes on rich people, by, raising the corporate rate, but things like that to bring in more money. Donald Trump is talking about cutting taxes for corporations, lowering taxes for billionaires, and a litany of tax cuts. Every time one pops into his head, the deductibility of a car loan or these other tax cuts he's doing, the only thing that will bring in money to make up for those tax cuts, if any of them get through, is his tariffs idea.
Well, and tariffs, of course, one component in which we see economic policy and geopolitical considerations coming into play here. And there was a lot of conversation on geopolitics in this interview, including when Trump was asked about his relationship with Vladimir Putin and whether he has spoken to him since leaving the White House. This was his answer.
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we. China has a lot less, but they'll catch us within 5 years.
So it would have been smart for him to talk to Putin, Gregory. No confirmation as to whether or not he really did. But as we heard at the beginning of the show here, it's not just Putin, also touting his relationships with Xi and Kim Jong-un. Kamala Harris has focused on that kind of language, saying that Donald Trump wants to be friends with dictators who flatter him. Again, similar to what I just asked Wendy, does it matter to voters?
Look, I mean, there's two different audiences for this. One is obviously the voters, and we're very used to thinking about these things in sort of horse race terms. We think of politicians and presidential candidates as transactional. The only reason why he would ever answer a question is to try to win votes. But it's also, look, we need to know what to expect if either of these two candidates gets elected. And I think we know a little bit about both of them, right? One's been vice president for almost 4 years. The other was president for 4 years. We know how Trump dealt with Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un during his presidency. And, the thing about this world is that dictators tend to stick around for a long time. And so Trump, even after taking 4 years off, will be dealing with some of the same cast of characters. On the other side, he brought up Macron today as well. So he does have relationships with a lot of these world leaders, some of them a little bit more filled with a little bit of tension than others.
You mentioned, I think, importantly, who was in the room today. You got a lot of laugh lines, a lot of applause lines. Did anything change today in this construct that Wall Street is more comfortable with a Trump 2.0 than someone they know less about named Kamala Harris?
Right. I don't think so. And I do think that we're at a point in the election where they've sort of honed their messages. And Trump is continuing to talk about the economy and immigration, the economy and immigration. And the Harris campaign seems to be focused in these last 3 weeks on turnout, because what she's talking about mostly is, isn't Trump awful? That's what her message has been. She's put out some policy positions, but she's not really hammering them home. And you know, I think most people in this country have a formed opinion about Donald Trump. They either think he's awful or they don't. And I'm not sure whether that message is enough in this razor-thin election to get those 7 swing states that she needs so badly.
Well, in one of them, Georgia, voting began today. A record turnout for early voting of more than 250,000, which brings us to this point, Gregory. We just have a minute left here. But this election is already underway. It's not just about November 5th.
Yeah, and the other question that Trump was asked today by our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait, was which state are you paying most attention to on election night? That's a question that a lot of politicians would not answer, because it's like picking among your children, right? Yeah. But he said Pennsylvania. And, of course, that's the state that has it's the biggest electoral prize, 19 electoral votes. Yeah. It's also one of the closest, and it's among the most hard fought if you just look at how much is being the millions and millions that are being spent on ads there. It may well come down to Pennsylvania as the tipping point state.